In the always strange and unusual world of science, apparently, recently, astronomers have discovered 12 new moons for Jupiter. Don't get too excited. That means Jupiter's total moon count is now 92. Wow, that is a lot of moons. If I had a spaceship and was very interested in Jupiter's moons, I could spend 3 days on each moon and still have a whole bunch of days left over to spend on Earth. Or, more realistically, flying between the moons because Jupiter's huge. And I mean, if not even astronomers could have found all these moons, who knows how many more moons we might discover on the way. Maybe those extra days weren't needed at all. That means that Jupiter has broken the world record for the most moons in this solar system, previously held by Saturn, with a miserable 83 moons. It's definitely going to have to convert some of those asteroids to moons in that big ring of its if it wants to get back in the game. And of course, I shouldn't even be talking down about Saturn's 83 moons. Our Earth only has one measly moon. Although I guess that's a good thing, because Saturn and Jupiter are both huge, and having more moons would attract more aggression from Saturn and Jupiter, and nobody wants to be aggressed by Jupiter. The only reason you don't see Saturn and Jupiter fighting it out all the time is because Jupiter knows it has the upper hand. It keeps extra moons up its sleeve. That's why we keep finding these moons. And Saturn just straight up doesn't really care that much because it just keeps destroying its own moons with all of its asteroids. I don't know that for a scientific fact, but I can guarantee someone thrown into the blender that is Saturn's rings of like ice and dust and stuff can't be a good time, can it? Speaking of good times, I'd like to take this short time to apologize for something I said in a previous episode. That being something about like, they only just recently discovered the big sac thing that keeps our organs intact. That is not a true thing, and was just something I said to contribute to more silly jokes. And I'm not justifying what I said, because it was incorrect, scientifically. But like, do you have any idea how many jokes I've had to scrap because they weren't technically correct, or made sense in any way? I most likely got that mixed up with some sort of recent discovery made about this organ that we already knew existed. So I'm taking all the blame for what I said. It was incorrect, and it didn't even contribute to that good a joke. Don't blame anyone else but me for that misstep. Don't blame Jelly. It's not her fault that she doesn't know the peritoneum. Speaking of that not very good joke that it contributed to, now I can finally apply that joke to something actually scientific. These scientists just now realizing that Jupiter had more moons than it did, that's more like a wear my glasses, they're on my head kind of moment. Although I guess due to the fact that Jupiter is humongous and it engulfs a lot of things, this kind of does make sense, but like, that would ruin the already ruined joke. But I'm not here to apologize for an unscientifically accurate joke. I'm here to make silly observations about scientific things right now. Like, for example, does it really need that many moons? Sure, Jupiter doesn't have a day-night cycle, because it doesn't need one, because no one lives on Jupiter, because it's made of gas. But still, if it wasn't in that competition with Saturn, on moon getting, I'd think it would be pretty envious of Earth, because Earth only has one moon, and Earth and the moon, they get along fine. They control the tides together. They keep werewolves in check half the time. They have a great relationship, unlike Jupiter and all of its moons, of which I guarantee Jupiter doesn't know all the moons' names. Although I guess that could be seen as a stupid point, because if Jupiter knows even one of its moon's names, that's already more than the Earth knows of its moon. I mean, it doesn't even have a name. Our moon is literally just called the Moon, because we only have one. What other title is there needed? We don't have Deimos and Phobos and Beamos. We have the Moon. I'm not exactly sure what scientists are going to do with this new information, because, oh boy, Jupiter has some more moons. Are they like made of some sort of special Jupiterian mineral that we never heard of before? Most likely not. They're probably just made of more rock, or whatever moons are made of, cheese. Say, that brings up a valid question. If the moon were made of cheese, how many people would it take to eat the moon? Could some theorist who is not me solve this conundrum? Almost absolutely. You just take the size of the moon and the size of the average stomach and like do some division work. But the real question is, why would you? If there are multiple people on the moon, that means multiple people are dragging their shoes all over the moon while you're trying to eat it. That's disgusting. This is the same reason I was weirded out by the world record for the largest pizza when I first saw it. Because I really hope they used a forklift to make that thing, because you are not going to be donating none of that to charity, with your feet all over it. No one wants marinara and Nikes. Pizza Hut has always been warning us of when they were going to do this. No one out-pizzas the hut. It's actually code for, we're going to make a pizza much, much bigger than your normal hut. I bet the reason I couldn't get into contact with that moon-to-belly ratio guy was because he was too busy working with Pizza Hut, trying to find a way to divide up the pizza so it doesn't look like when there's a party and they only bought one pizza, so they have to cut everything super tiny so everyone only gets the smallest sliver of pizza. Barely qualifiable as satiating, but still enough to say that you had pizza. I mean, how many people could this realistically serve? A few thousand? No, that's overshooting. A few hundred? Probably. But anything cut into a few hundred slices is bound to get messy. If Pizza Hut wants to take it a step further and end world hunger, they could just make a pizza the size of Jupiter, and while they're at it, they would not only end world hunger, but also end world. But hey, making the biggest pizza, that's a pretty big undertaking. It's a whole lot more work than making, let's say, the world's biggest energy drink. To do that, you wouldn't need electrolytes. You'd need electro flashbangs. You'd need enough caffeine to overdose everyone on Earth. Alright, well, now that I put it like that, it doesn't seem easier. The world's biggest milkshake has already been made, and it's a record unbeatable. Because I guarantee you, in the entire history of ice cream trucks, surely one of them must have missed the mark and landed in the ocean. Sure, it may have been an accident, and may not have even been documented. But if someone really wants to turn the ocean into a giant milkshake, it's just undoable, because the ocean's so big, has so much volume. You want to use the Great Pacific Garbage Patch as your little flamingo topper? Not gonna happen. And by flamingos, I mean umbrellas. And by umbrellas, I mean not umbrellas, because I don't know anyone who puts an umbrella in a milkshake. Maybe like lemonade, but not a milkshake. What was I thinking? Are you in the mood for some anomalies? Because I'm in the mood for some anomalies. Strangely, the world's most visually appetizing hamburger, constructed by food beauters, who work in the beauty industry of food, making those foods that you see in the commercials. You know, the ones unrealistically stacked, often glistening with residue? That is the most appealing hamburger, and also the least appealing hamburger, because of the fact that it's made of, like, glue and stuff. Isn't that strange? My thoughts have recently been very provoked. Thinking about thoughts, you know? Like, how many moons of cheeses would it take to make a pizza the size of Jupiter? Other side questions to the main question of eating the moon include, if it were only one person, how long would it take? Because I can guarantee you, I could eat the moon if I wanted to. I'm just not going to. Even using a theoretical non-cheese moon, I'm sure I could do it. Just, I don't have the time set aside. In fact, if I have a weekend or two to myself, I might just go ahead and do it. Because I can guarantee that eating the moon gives you control of all werewolves. And no scientist can disprove that. I'd like to see you try. To any lactose intolerants or cheese allergists out there who want to become supreme overlord of the werewolves, don't worry. There are democratic ways you can do it, like participating in your local werewolf election. You don't have to be a werewolf. You just have to have been born on the earth and are over the age of 35, if you're interested in running. Anyway, this has been Billy Netro's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, welcome to Billy Netro's Rant, and today I have something interesting. It ties in two of my favorite things, optical illusions and video games. Today's illusion is currently brought to you by something I've already talked about before, Elden Ring. And thankfully, today's illusion also doesn't involve any spoilers for Elden Ring. So if you ever plan on playing that game, don't worry about watching the rest of this. There's no reason to stop watching unless you just really hate illusions. And fun. The optical illusion comes from an item in the game called the Roar Medallion. Its description being a bronze medallion depicting a roaring giant. And that establishes the two things needed for this illusion to work. You need to know what it is, a roaring giant, and what it's made of, bronze. Before I show you what it looks like, just keep in mind, it's made of bronze, a material that when it ages and starts to corrode away, turns green. And as you will see, this medallion is absolutely green. So that means it's pretty old. And with those observations given to you, here's what it looks like. As you can see, the Roar Medallion does indeed depict a roaring troll. I'm not sure why you had any doubts about that, considering it's one of the two pieces of information I gave to you. The other piece of information, of course, being it's made of bronze, and it's green, which means it's old. So here is the question I impose to you, lovely viewer. Does our good friend, the Roar Medallion, depict a troll screaming towards us with half of its face being corroded off due to wear and tear? Or is the troll instead roaring to the left, and we have a side view of his face? I will now give you a few seconds to make your choice as to which way the troll is facing, just in case you're watching this on a program that doesn't have a pause button. Okay then, Jelly, now that you've seen the image, what do you think? Is it facing forward, or is it facing to the left? Facing left. Okay. I'm gonna go ask a few other people on their opinions, just so that we have a proper data set. Excuse me for a moment.
It to me looks like the troll is roaring to the left. Wow, that is the most left-facing thing I've ever seen. I am not quite sure. It could be going either way. What do you think, Chuck? Well, I'd have to say it's facing to the left. Oh yeah, you're right. I suppose I didn't see that part.
Which part of your show involves interviews about hairy guys screaming at the left?
Ah, it's a puppy dog. Billy Nut Joe, that is the most adorable dog I've ever seen. And at least the third most adorable I've seen looking to the left.
Well, Jelly, it seems that I am stupid, because everyone said the exact same thing. It's facing the left. I thought I had something really clever going on, where everyone was going to say it's facing forward, just like I first thought, but then I'll show them the mountains in the background, signifying that it's actually roaring towards the mountains, which are to the left, and it's a profile, but apparently not. I don't get it. The tiny equip icon in the game makes it look like it's looking forward, but holy cow, it's an Einstein-Monroe situation, Jelly. I'm not an idiot. I was just going about this all wrong. Of course it's easier to see the mountain details up close, It could only ever be looking forward if you're viewing it from a distance and can't see the fine details. The real question is, do I go out and find everyone so I can interview them again a second time? Or is it already ruined? I'm leaning towards already ruined, but whatever. Oh, right, I still have a show to do. Well, while it's always very important to get at least 8 hours of sleep every night so that your body can reset itself and get rid of all the harmful things, like cleaning out your brain of any yucky liquid, or whatever it does, I don't know. I saw a British guy talk about it once, it was pretty disturbing. I'm not going to go into much more detail, other than the fact that you should always get your sleep, of which I'm going to do, because this has been Billy Netcho's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Extra bonus fun fact, that 8 hours of sleep, minimum, is required not in small bursts, but all at once. Because there are multiple stages of sleep, and as you sleep more, you go through more stages, until you get into a stage called REM, which stands for Rapid Eye Movement. And I'm not talking about the band, I'm talking about the sleep process. So once you get to REM, then your brain starts getting rid of all the crap. And then it goes through the process again, and the longer you sleep for a period of time, the more REMs you get. And that's how sleep was born. Thank you so much, Fwim, for inviting me to your Future Employees program. I can't wait to learn about jobs and stuff.
You're welcome, but really we should be the ones thanking you, as you are the only person to have, showed up.
I don't know, maybe just a lot of people don't care about their futures or future jobs.
That or the fact that we didn't really advertise at all. So, Billy, is there anything you're particularly good at? You know, any special skills? Not that that's a requirement, I'm just curious.
Well, I've never really had much of a problem with public speaking. In fact, I often do it, just for fun. Except, oftentimes, the public speaking is just to one person. So, I guess, conversation?
Being able to talk to people is a very important skill in most jobs, especially ones that involve interactions with other people, like my job. It's also important to find a job that you like doing, so that you have motivation to do it, which is why I'm a pharmacist.
Because you like helping people?
Yes, and also I like small bottles.
That's nice.
And Billy, although sometimes it may be out of your control, do try to make sure that the person that you're working for is not, let's just say, undesirable quality. Ask anyone in this room, and I'm sure that they'll point right to Derek.
Well, is anyone going to explain why there's a little kid sitting here?
Derek, this is a part of your Employees of the Future program that you approved last week.
Oh man, I'm always approving things that I shouldn't be approving. Who knew that being the head of a mall of all places would involve so much legislature? Anyway, kid, my name's Derek Verderhals, the most beloved boss in the history of the world.
Don't bother, we already told him that you're a horrible boss.
Oh man, at least let me tell him. So, little kid, do you have any questions so far?
Actually, as a matter of fact, I do. Mr. Verderhals, do you have any other jobs besides being the boss of this place?
That is an excellent question about me. As a matter of fact, I do have a second job. It involves selling elevators.
Oh boy, this again. How many times do I have to tell you elevator sales isn't a legitimate business? There are a very limited amount of people in this area who will buy an elevator. Is anyone at this table interested in buying an elevator right now?
No, I suppose not.
I couldn't afford an elevator if I wanted one, which I really don't.
And, personally, I prefer escalators. Yeah, well, you're all a bunch of idiots, because elevator sales is a great business. Those in the market of elevators are plentiful and easy to find if you know where to look, which I don't suppose you do, Fwim. Plus, I don't even need a lot of people to buy elevators. Do you know how expensive installing and, getting all the materials for an elevator is, Fwim? It's incredibly expensive. It has so many zeros in it, your little brain couldn't comprehend it, dummy.
Is this kind of language really allowed in an office setting?
It is if I say it is, because I'm the boss and I can do whatever I want.
Because I think you would be liked a lot more if, instead of insulting and using mean words to your employees, you instead listened to what they had to say and treated them as respectfully as a boss should, of which you are. And I may not know half the people in this room's names, but that's just because I only got here today, and you've been controlling this place for hopefully longer than a day, so I think you should learn to be more mature.
Well, it wouldn't be very professional to take advice from a little kid. This meeting is over. Everyone go back to your normal jobs and don't come back here until tomorrow.
Have you considered adding persuasion to your list of talents?
I don't know, I've always been more into the field of convincing.
But they're the same thing.
I am 100% sure that convincing and persuading are two separate categories of verbal manipulation, with a more annoying third category called lying, which is what I was just doing.
Oh, well, you had me convinced.
I think you had me more persuaded. Well, you're all having me confused. Get out of here now! Oh, I mean it!
Made in the United States, made in China, made in Taiwan, made in Japan. All these things, they're being made everywhere. But, I don't see any factories around here. How are they going to make all this stuff, all these millions of products, when there's not even a factory here? Surely they'd have to have factories everywhere. Sure, I may be underestimating the size of the world, and just how big the planet is, and how much space it has. Not outer space, but on top of the Earth space. Like, physical space where you could lay out factories. Where did they all come from? Oh, hi, welcome to Billy Nacho's Rant. I was just talking to my friend about the size of the world. How big it is, and is it big enough? Is it too small? Because in those opening shots you often see in movies, where it starts from outer space and zooms all the way in, it doesn't look like there's that much room in between. But then there are also those sweeping shots that show huge sweeping shots over, like, a city, and it looks pretty big. I guess it's just how you frame it. But let's start talking about an actual topic. You know, I always talk about the English language, and all the silly things that can be done with it. What I don't often talk about are other languages. So let's change that today. Let's talk Spanish. Although not the entirety in Spanish, because I don't know that much Spanish. I mean, I suppose I could do the entire episode in Spanish, but that wouldn't be very funny, because I'm not good at making jokes in English, let alone another language, and also most of it would just be me standing there blankly translating in my head. Have you ever heard of the city of Los Angeles? Me neither, but apparently it's called the City of Angels, and that's because in Spanish it means angels. And, no it doesn't. In English, Los Angeles means Los Angeles. Los Angeles, on the other hand, means the angels. But I've never once heard someone refer to Los Angeles as Los Angeles. Maybe I just haven't been talking to the right people. Where even is Los Angeles? Probably somewhere to the west. Well, almost definitely, because we right now are in the very far east of the United States. So, everything is to the west, except for the things that are to the north and south. And when you think about it, if you go east enough, eventually you'll go west. Because of the whole circular thing. That's something to think about. I'm sure it's very prolific, if you worded it better. The east of the east is the west. There's your more prolific wording. And here's a far less prolific wording. I know how spheres work. Spanish is fun, of course, because languages are fun. Because languages allow us to communicate. I think the reason people don't like Spanish is because if you're being taught Spanish in school, unlike English class, which involves teaching English, a language that you already speak, in my case, as well as learning about, ways English can be used and stuff. In Spanish, it's a lot more focused on learning the Spanish, because after all, it's a whole new language, and you can't do anything fun with the language if you don't even know how to speak it. I'm sure that early years of English were like that too. Learning all the letters and how they work and stuff, it was probably terrible. But I don't remember if it was terrible, because I was very tiny, and don't remember things from back then. I do remember things from back now, which is why Spanish, in comparison, seems worse than English in terms of learning, but it's actually the exact same thing. Just not English, it's Spanish. For some aspects of math, I can understand why would I learn this when I could use a calculator, even though I do think learning math is good, because then you understand what the calculator is doing. The same argument does not really apply to Spanish, because why learn Spanish when I could use Google Translate is an argument you could theoretically make. It would just be an incredibly stupid argument, because Google Translate is pretty darn stupid. Can't conjugate for nothing. I, on the other hand, am a whiz at conjugating. Allow me to demonstrate. Yo, tú, nosotros. There, that's enough to qualify me as a whiz, right? Anyway, enough about Spanish being taught in schools. Let's talk about Spanish being talked about right now. One of my favorite things about Spanish is the amount of internal rhyming that can sometimes happen. And now, of course, this also sometimes happens in English, but with Spanish, there are a whole lot more small connecting words in there that give everything a nice flow. For example, I don't eat tacos in Spanish would be yo no como tacos. Yo no como tacos. See the repetition of the O sound? That's really fun. It's like a bumpy hill. Yo no como tacos. As opposed to I don't eat tacos in English, which is just I don't eat tacos. See? Not nearly as fun. It's not a fun, bumpy roller coaster road. It's a flat highway with a street sign that says I don't eat tacos, which is information drivers need to know for some reason. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm kind of jealous of the Spanish language. It has so many good words, like the word for bus. One of the words for bus, guagua. Guagua? La guagua? I'm boarding La Guagua? If Dr. Seuss was writing in Spanish and not English, he didn't even need to come up with anything. Everything's already so fun. How do you say I missed the bus? Perder el autobús? An alternative would be gua gua gua. Another cool thing about Spanish is that it doesn't often use pointless letters like English does, or at least not as often. For example, off the top of my head, English words I can think of with pointless letters. Knife. K-N-I-F-E? Knife? No. Pterodactyl has a P at the beginning for some atrocious reason. Pterodactyl? No. And the most offensive word in the English language in terms of worthless letters is coup. C-O-U-P. Half those letters are not needed. C-U would have just been fine. Coup? Cuckoo. Are you cuckoo for coming up with that spelling? C-O-U-P? Cowp? Coop? Coop? Chicken coop? C-O-O-P. And then another form of coop. C-O-U-P. Why the U? Why the P? Why the O? Why the C? Why does that word exist in the first place? But hey, to give English some credit, I'm a whole lot more familiar with English than I am with Spanish. Maybe I just so happen to have learned all the cool things about Spanish before I learned all the boring things about Spanish. Or all the nonsensical things. Or all the things that Billy Nut Joe would talk about Spanish. In that case, why didn't I wait until a few years later, when I know more about Spanish, so I have more to say about Spanish that I would normally say about English? Well, that's because I don't have years to wait. Because this has been Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Hello, welcome to Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and today I have something very special planned, which is sort of misleading as I don't ever really plan anything. But today, as you could take a wild guess, and by wild guess I mean incredibly wild guess, both literally and figuratively, because of this location, we are going to be talking about fairy tales. What is a fairy tale? Well, by my definition, it's a tale that involves things that could be categorized in the same group as fairies, some sort of mythical thing that happens. And since these are mostly directed at kids, there should also, of course, be a lesson. So let's try to figure out some lessons of classic fairy tales. Let's start with an easy one as far as making fun of things goes. Little Red Riding Hood, called that about a character who wears a little red riding hood. Whatever the heck a riding hood is. I suppose it's a hood you wear while riding? But this particular person named Little Red Riding Hood does not wear a Little Red Riding Hood because she likes to go Little Red Riding. Instead, she wears a Little Red Riding Hood because she just likes it. And as such, attained the nickname Little Red Riding Hood. So the story starts with the titular girl, Little Red Riding Hood, as she's called by the people, venturing out to deliver her grandmother a bag of some sort of food. I don't know. I think it's pastries, some sort of pastry. I don't know. What's today? Depends on the day. Of course, it's a fairy tale, so there are millions of different versions. And today is March 14th. So let's just say the pastry she's holding is cookies. So Little Red Riding Hood needs to deliver these cookies to her grandmother, who lives in some sort of forest for some reason. And Little Red Riding Hood is warned to not talk to strangers, which rather blatantly tells out the theme of the story, which is don't talk to strangers. So who is the stranger that she inevitably does talk about? Because it's a fairy tale, and people always have to mess up in fairy tales in order to learn things, because common sense does not exist. Well, she meets someone who is actually a recurring character in many fairy tales, called the Big Bad Wolf, which is a rather straightforward nickname compared to Little Red Riding Hood, as it does not require any previous knowledge of whatever a riding hood is. Big Bad Wolf. Easy, simple, done. However, rather unfortunately for our heroic protagonist, Little Red Riding Hood does not know about the big or bad part of the wolf. All she knows is that there is a wolf, which here brings up my first question. Since this is a fairy tale, it has to involve something fantastical. And the only fantastical thing in the story, really, is the wolf. So we're assuming that this story takes place in a universe where animals do not talk to people. In that case, why is Little Red Riding Hood trusting the wolf at all? Let alone, not just he's a stranger, but the fact that he's a talking wolf. Seems a little out of the ordinary. So after that, Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf exchange what I can only assume to be an expertly written Shakespearean dialogue between a little girl wearing a rather remarkably small riding hood and a talking wolf. I don't know, I trust the writers of Little Red Riding Hood to do a good job. this story has been around for like a long time, so of course it's got to be an amazing story. And in that exchange, of which I'm not sure how it exactly goes, Little Red Riding Hood for some reason tells the wolf exactly where she's going. And this, I assume, is the teaching moment. Don't tell random, probably murderers, your location and where you're going to deliver your elderly grandmother some cookies. I don't know why I specified that she's elderly, but I suppose you could have a young grandmother. Anyway, back to the story. Little Red Riding Hood, she's walking along the path, do, and she gets to the house. However, massive plot twist, which is not actually a plot twist because this is brought up before Little Red Riding Hood gets to the house in almost every iteration of the story except this one, just so I can say that there's a massive plot twist. But the wolf somehow managed to not only know where Grandma's house is, but also get there before Little Red Riding Hood. So what does the wolf do at Grandma's house? Well, the wolf swallows Grandma. Keep a note the word swallow, which is not necessarily a wolf does to something that it wants to eat. A wolf is not a snake. But, assuming this is a talking wolf, maybe in some prologue to the Big Bad Wolf's character arc of becoming some sort of elderly person consuming creature, the wolf traded its teeth in for the ability to talk, or something. I don't know, that seems like something that would happen in a fairy tale. So let's continue with the story. Actually, another massive plot hole. If the wolf's whole objective was to swallow both Little Red Riding Hood and also the grandmother, order of operations here. Wouldn't it make more sense to just eat Little Red Riding Hood out in the woods, where they're completely alone, and then go over to the grandma's house and finish the job? I'm gonna stop talking. I don't want to influence any wolf, snake, serial killers. Anyway, Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf are both at the house, and Little Red Riding Hood goes up to the wolf, and this is the very important part. This is the memorable, iconic line. She says something like, "Oh, Grandma, your eyes are looking particularly wolfy today." And Grandma says, "All the better to see you with, my dear." "Oh, Grandma, your fur is looking particularly present today. You don't usually have that. All the better to look like a carpet, my dear." Or, I have no idea. How is Little Red Riding Hood this stupid? You know what, let's give her some credit. Maybe she's never actually seen her grandmother before. Maybe she thinks that she was born of wolf blood, or something. Maybe her mom is also a wolf, and she just can't tell the difference. In which case, this would require multiple prequels to explain what the heck is happening. But let's just continue with the story. Little Red Riding Hood cannot tell the difference between a wolf and her grandmother. And then here's the immersion-breaking part. The part that doesn't make sense. "Oh, Grandma, what big teeth you have. All the better to eat you with, my dear." I thought you traded the teeth for... You know what? Whatever. I'm just wrong. And of course, the teeth thing has to be like the only thing every single version of that story has in common. So there goes my fan theory. Maybe the actual fairy part of this fairy tale isn't the talking wolf, but rather the sheer lunacy of what's happening and how little sense it makes. And so it can only be comprehended by someone whose brain is as small as a fairy's. And I don't mean that to insult fairies. It's just that fairies are small, and thus have a smaller brain. And so logically, the wolf takes what few victories it ever had in life and actually decides to eat Little Red Riding Hood. Because if everyone is this stupid, might as well take it. And so now the wolf has completed its objective. What does it do? Flee the crime scene, like anyone would? No, the wolf stays there. Because we have to introduce a third and final character. Well, I suppose it's fourth character, but the grandma didn't really put up much of a fight, did she? This final character is called the Woodsman. Why? Well, this name is a lot more easy to figure out, as the Woodsman is not so much a name as it is a job. He's a lumberjack. He cuts down trees. And as such, has a big axe. What will the axe be used on? Well, it doesn't exactly take a rocket scientist to figure that out. Or I guess a more appropriate metaphor would be, it doesn't exactly take a Little Red Riding Hood to know what's going on. I'm sure even she would know if she was still alive. But oh wait, she just might be. Because the woodsman, or whatever he was, woodsmith, uses the axe. And here's where some parts get a little hazy. Because in some stories, the woodsman just shakes everyone out of the wolf's mouth. Which not only does not make sense from an anatomical standpoint, it also defeats the whole point of having the character be a woodsman. Because if you're not a woodsman who's going to use an axe, why are you a woodsman? So we all know what really happens here. The woodsman uses the axe to kill the wolf, and, I guess, save Little Red Riding Hood and the grandma? But I mean, who does this woodsman think he is? Maybe it was just a wolf's house. No, that wouldn't make sense, because I'm sure this is a small fairy tale neighborhood. Everyone knows each other. And the woodsman knows when two of his friends are being digested, of which they, at this point, are probably dead. But wait, here are some more version differences. In some versions of the story, the wolf is not killed, although the two people are saved. Instead, the woodsman's genius plan is to take everyone out of the wolf's stomach, which would not only require cutting through the chest, but also that little sac that holds all the organs in, as well as any intestines that happen to be in the way, all the arteries and stuff, and finally cutting into the stomach. of which I'm almost guaranteed the acid would leak out and corrode the rest of the body. But no, not only is this guy a woodsman, he's also a surgeon, as he somehow manages to not kill the wolf during this operation, and instead replaces its stomach with rocks, and then stitches it back up. Not only is this an incredibly cruel and unusual punishment, you might as well have left the wolf dead. Then it could have passed away peacefully in its sleep, but instead, no. They push it down a well, or something, or like a river. Not only violate the internal structure of the wolf, but also drown it. This is just terrible. Sure, it was the wolf's fault, but this is just so needlessly complicated. So that was the story of Little Red Riding Hood, or at least the story of Little Red Riding Hood assembled from the cherry-picked sections of the story of Little Red Riding Hood that I could remember in not-so-chronological order. But I'm pretty sure at the beginning I said fairy tales, plural, so I have to think of a second one. Oh, I know. I am Billy. How about we talk about the ever-asinine story, The Three Billy Goats Gruff. This one is not nearly as well known as Little Red Riding Hood. For good reason. It sucks. So here's the basic gist of the story. There are three goats who need to cross a bridge, and because this is a fairy tale, what fantastical thing is under the bridge? Of course it's a troll. So the goats need to get across the bridge. But there's a troll in the way. So their solution is send the smallest of the goats first, and the goat goes across the bridge, and the troll says, "Hey goat, I'm gonna eat you." But the goat responds, "No, you shouldn't eat me. You should eat my brother. He's bigger." And instead of just eating both of them, the troll says, "Okay, fine, you can live. I'll eat your brother." And so the brother shows up, and the troll says, "Alright, same thing, same story. I'm gonna eat you." "No, you're not. You should eat the biggest goat, because that has the most protein." And the troll says, "Okay, fine. I will not eat all three of you, and instead, just that one, because it sounds the best." And so the big goat comes, and the troll says, "I'm gonna eat you." And the goat just headbutts the troll off the bridge. And that's the conclusion to the story. Two brothers who are willing to sacrifice each other just to survive. And the only good character, the big Billy Goat who defeated the troll. Which brings up the question, why couldn't he have just crossed the bridge first? In defense of this story, maybe, you could say, hey, maybe the three Billy Goats Gruff, they collaborated on this plan. They knew it would work. It was all set up. But no, it never says anywhere in the story that they all agreed to this. They're all just horrible people who would sacrifice each other to get across the stupid bridge. And much like the Big Bad Wolf, the troll does not just eat the food that's given to him. Always has to be something better. Save it for later. I'm sure they'll cross the bridge again. So what's the moral of the story? Well, the only one I can think of is violence is the answer. Because the solution was solved with violence. And that was the only solution that worked. Sacrificing your friends is bad. That's a good message. Violence is good. Not so good a message. So after giving these two examples, what is a fairy tale? Let's revise my previous definition. In my opinion, a fairy tale is confusing, involves magic, sometimes, although the magic doesn't have to be particularly magical, just something a little out of the ordinary. They feature a message, but it's usually morally ambiguous, or incredibly hard to decipher. They have no target demographic, as they will feature rigorous blood and guts, even though they're supposed to be directed at children. They have dozens and dozens of versions, so you can cherry pick the ones that you find the most appealing, which I'm assuming are none of them, because they're not particularly well written. And the most important part, they feature characters who really like eating each other, but only sometimes, only when they're in the mood. To any aspiring writers out there, or anyone interested in anything creative, don't worry, I'm sure eventually you'll find someone who appreciates your stories. Because after all, if these stories can get super popular, then really anything's possible. This has been Billy Nature's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Happy Valentine's Day, Jelly! Oh, wow. That's embarrassing. Let's just, Oh, hi, Jelly. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I think I said correct the first time. With it being St. Patrick's Day, I think it would be appropriate to talk about something either white, orange, green, or gold, considering those are the colors most commonly associated with the day, for obvious reasons. Gold being pretty close to yellow, which is pretty close to orange. And I say that because it would be easier to talk about something yellow than it would be to talk about something orange. Because unlike yellow, orange is a pretty scarce color in the grand scheme of color. You're much more likely to see something any color other than orange, under most circumstances. Which is one of the fun bonuses of St. Patrick's Day, an increased percentage of orange in your vision and peripheral vision. Alright, enough talking about nothing. Let's think of some colors. White! It's one of the most common colors that you'll see, and some would argue it's not even a color, but I'd say it fits the bill for color. Clouds are white, for some reason, even though they're made of water droplets, and water is not white. I assume it has something to do with chemical bonding, or something like that. I don't know, I pick and choose when I know stuff about chemistry. and it's nearly impossible to not see white when you're looking at a computer screen. So many things are the color white. Is calling it the color white the correct thing to say? Should I be saying the shade white, the tone white? No, I'm going to say the color white. And if it is a color, white is the brightest color. There is no color brighter than white, because white is bright. White is bright if bright was a color. White and bright are synonymous because white is a shade, and bright is a bright shade. Is white the absence of color? No, not really, because of the way color works. Color is the part of light that an object reflects off, that we pick up with our eyes. So if something is the color white, then it's actually every single color at once, making white the most colorful color and the least colorful color all at the same time. However, if you were to ask me, white is the least colorful color, because I don't care about the semantics of light reflection and all that stuff. I care about my eyes, and my eyes see white, and white is not every color, so white is the least colorful color. Except maybe for black, which I would say is definitely more of a shade, because when you say I'm going to go stand in the shade over there, you don't stand directly in the sun. You stand in the shade, and shadows are black most of the time. As long as you're not standing on any colored glass. You know what? Light is confusing. Let's move on to orange. Now, much like the paradox that is the color white, orange is also sort of its own opposite, as orange generally is a very happy color when it's a synthetic orange designed by people. However, in nature, orange is quite a dangerous color. You know, like poison dart frogs. Some of those are orange, and poison is generally not a happy thing. Unless, you know what, I can't think of any examples where poison is a happy thing off the top of my head. But there are plenty of good orange things in nature too, like red pandas, and some other example, I'm sure. However, green is by far the easiest to talk about. I don't have any half-baked nerd talk, or poorly thought-out examples, thank you, Jelly. Green is green. Green is everywhere, especially on St. Patrick's Day, drawing special attention to a fun little plant called a clover, or as some people call them, shamrocks, which I think is a pretty darn clever name, because it quite is a sham that something called a shamrock would not be a rock and instead be a plant. Green is, I think, the most synergetic color with St. Patrick's Day, because when it is that day, most people will wear green, as opposed to the other two colors, which, in the case of white, you'll most likely wear something white on accident, and orange, well, not everyone has something orange, and not everyone has something green either. So if you go to an event on St. Patrick's Day, and you don't have anything green, a good tip is to just not wear anything at all, and everyone will be so distracted by that, they won't even notice you're not wearing green. Simple solution. It's pretty difficult to not like shamrocks. Their leaves are shaped like hearts. This is nature drawing attention to them, which now that I think about it, does not make any sense, because they are not shaped like hearts, they are shaped like the heart shape, which came about somehow, as the heart shape is not similar to the heart organ. But who knows, maybe the heart shape actually stemmed from the fact that people really like shamrocks, and so they put their heart out to shamrocks. Which brings up the question, why is heart associated with love? Well, I think because it regulates blood flow, and love regulates love flow. I don't know, I'd have to go back on the last time I talked about this, because I'm pretty sure I said something about heart shape versus heart organ before. And then there's also the harp instrument, H-A-R-P, which I don't think has anything to do with anything, and was a non sequitur. Speaking of non sequiturs, and by non sequiturs I mean sequiturs, Jelly, you're Irish. That makes you an expert on St. Patrick's Day. Have anything to add? Or do you just want to go out and have some fun? This has been Billy Nacho's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. It is now officially springtime, Jelly. Do you know what that means? Well, it means it's not winter. And as much as I can say I am quite a fan of winter, I'm not a fan of winter when it goes on for 3 months, which is a contradictory statement. But 3 months is a long time. It feels like it's winter more than it is the temperate seasons. But now it is those, and I'm happy. This excitement that I am feeling does actually have a name, strangely enough. When a person feels an added amount of energy or enthusiasm during the start of spring, it is called spring fever, which I'm pretty sure was a name created by someone who had spring fever but did not want it, because spring fever does in no way sound appealing. Fevers are bad things. Fevers are an illness. Being excited isn't an illness. Whoever this idiomer was, obviously, is quite the spoilsport. There was a flower on my head. How did it get there? I do not remember putting a flower on my head, nor rolling into any flowers. Must have been the wind. Huh, well, certainly can't be wearing this. It's extremely unprofessional. Well, now I'm not feeling it anymore. Do you think maybe... Holy cow, Jelly! I think I just found spring. It's a metaphor, Jelly. It's symbolism. It's spring. It's here. Do you want to try? Yeah, it looks nice on you. And if this itself is a metaphor for spring, then Jelly represents the trees, and spring, which is represented by a flower, which represents spring, represents the flowers on trees. So I guess it's not much of a metaphor. I'm not sure where I was going with that. But anyway, spring. It's a very interesting holiday. Season. I have good feelings about this spring. But, you know, as they say, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Which is actually kind of a stupid saying, because I think the information of the amount of chickens that will hatch with the amount that don't hatch is pretty darn important ratio for those into chickening. And it's an even more relevant saying now, because chickens are commonly associated with spring. Because spring is breathing new life into the trees or whatever, just like a chicken hatching, except instead of a chicken, it's a tree. There are many other animal mascots for spring, such as ducks, for pretty much the same reason, so I guess all birds, and also bunnies, because Easter is in spring. I met a nice bunny earlier this week. I should probably interview her about that. Now that's professional. Interviewing. Something strange about spring is that it doesn't really have a associated festive beverage. For example, in autumn, it's like apple cider, or pumpkin cider, because I'm sure that exists. In winter, it's either eggnog or hot chocolate. And in summer, it's like lemonade and stuff. Cool drinks like that. But spring falls somewhere between autumn and summer in terms of beverage choice, so there's not really anything that closely linked to it. Quite unfortunate. Speaking of beverages, electrolytes are probably something that I think I've brought up before. And if I said I didn't know what they were, now I do know what they are. And if I didn't, well, pretend I did before, so this can be a nice follow-up to that. I know what electrolytes are now. It's like a chemical composition of stuff. And included in those electrolytes are salt. So, when Gatorade says thirst quencher, which is already a pretty unappealing way to market a product, sounds like a medical thing, just quenches your thirst, nothing else. Technically it does do that, but because of the salt, it also makes you more thirsty, but somehow still quenched. So does that mean Gatorade is addictive? Well, no, not really. It's not like addictive like nicotine. It's more addictive like you would just need more of it than you would need water to actually be 100% quenched. And electrolytes also contain electricity, so you could consider Gatorade the healthier alternative to sucking on a battery, except Gatorade doesn't kill you. So it's pretty good. Or would the electric charge in electrolytes be more like rubbing your feet on a carpet? Which I suppose is just a weaker version of batteries, because it provides way less of a charge. And Gatorade, way less than rubbing your feet on the carpet. I should make a hierarchy. The weakest electrical charge is taking a swig of Gatorade. Slightly stronger is rubbing your feet on a carpet. Slightly stronger, or about the same level, I don't know, I'm not an electrologist, is rubbing a balloon on your hair. And way more than that is like batteries. Or like toasters. Other electrical things that you would actually use. Well, that fills my silly science quota for today. Anyway, back to the topic of spring. What else happens in spring? Well, recently daylight savings time was messed up yet again. So now all our nocturnal buddies have one less hour of nighttime. And we get to enjoy one extra hour of sun. Yippee. I guess. Sorry, Jelly. I guess now I realize that I like spring because of the colors. Not so much because of what actually happens then. This has been Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. Go bounce or something. I don't know. Springtime things. Jelly, you are not going to believe what happened to me this morning. So I had this bottle of shampoo, yeah? And I squeezed it a little bit. And out from the nozzle came bubbles. Bubbles! Oh, it was magical! Bubbles from shampoo! I've only ever heard of such a thing happening, but now that it's happening, I can't help but squeeze every single half-open shampoo bottle I find. Who knows, maybe it'll be a bubbler. And despite the fact that bubbles are made of soap, just bubbles in and of themselves don't really do much in terms of cleaning, because soap needs water in order to help it clean stuff, and bubbles, well, they're very small and hollow, which means they basically contain zero soap. So if you were to try to clean yourself using only bubbles, it would take a long time. Using soap for its intended purpose may be a chore, but using soap for fun can be fun. Can't say the same thing for shampoo, because on the bottle, it almost always says, tear-free. I've tested it, and That's a lie. Rather paradoxically, even though water is used to get rid of sticky things, water is quite sticky when you think about it. But not sticky in like a honey way, but sticky in a it sticks around kind of way. For example, if you take a bucket of water and dump it on your hair, then it's not going to get out with some assistance. Or, the sun, which is assistance. Water just stays there, because water likes to be absorbed by everything. That's why sponges are much heavier when they're wet, because there's water inside. And water, it doesn't seem like it should weigh that much, does actually weigh a lot. Just take a look at any ocean. Maybe that's not the best example because an ocean's worth of any amount of thing is pretty darn heavy. So think about it like this. Water adds extra weight. So if you ever had to go to battle with Rapunzel, just set the fight on a rainy day, and you'd have an advantage. I guess the same thing could be said for squirrels. If you ever find yourself having to fight a fluffy squirrel, just set the fight in the rain, because a droopy squirrel is a less effective squirrel, and a less effective droopy squirrel weighs more than a more effective fluffy squirrel. It's quite fascinating how much water can change your movements. For example, astronauts train in big pools to better simulate the weightlessness in space, because space is like water in the fact that it slows your movement, but not necessarily space itself, just the fact that there's not really any gravitational pull to pull you around. And underwater, I guess you could say it's the same thing, because water sort of becomes the gravitational pull, making it more difficult to move, because now, instead of just being pulled one direction, down, you're being pulled in all directions, but also no directions at all, if you're not moving, which makes it difficult to move quickly underwater, as opposed to on land. Much like space, in water, there's not necessarily an up or down, because you have freedom of movement. You can go wherever you want, assuming you don't touch the bottom or top of the pool. But let's just say you're in an endless pool, the endless pool that is space. There really is no up and down, just 360 movement, wherever you want. And it can be quite disorienting. So disorienting, in fact, that that's why astronauts are training down there, so they can be less disoriented and more agile underwater. And also space, which I assume would be the more important aspect. That super extra added aspect of confusion is generally why you don't see many piñata parties being held underwater. No one would ever hit the thing.
Hey there, squirrel. How's it going?
Tenerbot, now is not a good time. I'm trying to have an intellectual conversation about water and soap.
Water and soap? You're talking about something you've never used before. Sewer rodent.
How would you know? You can't smell. You're a robot.
Sniff, 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 sniff. Smells like sewer to me.
Well, Tenerbot, now that you're here, do you have any interesting insights on water or soap that you'd like to share?
Of course. Have you ever lost a sock before?
A sock? Yeah, I've lost socks before.
Well, what if I told you I knew where they go?
Really? Well, I would be quite interested to know that information.
Well, in that case, I am not telling. You couldn't handle the truth. It would break your stupid mind. It's like opening the Ark of the Covenant. Or witnessing Cthulhu. You sure you want to know? Are you positive? Are you certain? How will this affect your social life and family relations, Joe? Are you responsible for the actions knowing this will cause? Of course so. So are you willing to risk it all for this forbidden intel, Billy? Or will you be forever a stupid furball with no value beyond physical?
If you're gonna tell me where the socks go, tell me where the socks go.
Okay. Maybe work on that attitude? The socks just kinda get stuck in the machines. It's nothing interesting.
You know what? I don't know what I was expecting. But I should have been expecting that. Nothing. You never do anything, Tenerbot, and yet you do so much to annoy everyone.
Sniff, 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 sniffa. Do I smell hot chocolate? Have you been drinking hot chocolate, Billy? For Pete's sake, it's spring.
They can smell?
Better believe robots can smell. This is the future, baby.
You know what? I don't care. The ability to smell does not make you tip-proof, Tenerbot. I will tip you. I'm a tipper. I'm being intimidated by a piece of plastic. I should probably calm down. This has been Billy Nut Joe's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. If you're ever attacked by a robot, spray some air freshener on it. Not only will the moisture short-circuit it, but also apparently now the smell will disrupt it. Gee, the future sure is futuristic.
Hello. Hi, Chuck. So, do you like this bench? Yeah, it's a fine bench. Chuck, do you know what I did this morning? Is the bench a clue? No, the bench is not a clue. Because what I did, you would never be able to guess. I walked right up to Billy Nut Joe, and I handed him a slice of cake. So was it like a robot cake or something? No, I'd never buy a robot cake. That stuff's disgusting. It was just a normal piece of cake. So why would you give your enemy a normal piece of cake. I didn't want to. It's just, with him flying around all the time, it's never safe to do anything fun. Are you being stalked by a pilot? Not quite commercial airline pilot, but more attack helicopter. Yellow, blue. Oh, are you talking about Supernova? Jack, don't say it! Hey, I heard my name called. There must be trouble. No, there's no problem. Just two guys and a giant moron hanging out in the park. Yeah, that monkey, am I right? Well, anyway, if there's no problem, I'm just gonna go return some orphans to their parents or something. See ya. I wasn't referring to you as the... Yeah, it's okay, I know. Wait, so you're afraid of someone you just called a giant moron? Well, there's not much risk in that. It's like making fun of a really stupid nuclear bomb. Who won't understand? Well, it was nice to see you, but I have, things that I have to go do, so... Yeah, I also have things to do. They just so happen to involve bench sitting. I'm already pretty good at bench sitting. I'd like to expand my talents into other fields. Like that field right over there. That field has a pretty nice bench.
Yesterday was April Fool's Day. They brought back the cat blocks on Scratch. Hooray! Do they cause everything to be a whole lot more laggy? Yep. Are they cute? Absolutely. So that makes it worth it. Anyway, let's get on to the actual rant. I don't know about you, but I really like video games. They're like board games, except it's a lot harder to lose the pieces. One of the major advantages of video games as compared to board games, not only in the fact that they are more immersive, in the fact that they can actually have a fully detailed world instead of a flat cardboard representation of that world, and also the fact that video games have what board games do not. AI companionship, and also, more importantly, AI enemyship. Because a fully moving, articulate goblin creature is a whole lot more entertaining than a cardboard token that says goblin on it. But I'm not here to tell you why video games are better than board games, because I don't think that at all. Board games can be just as fun as video games, and there are just as many sucky board games as there are sucky video games. In fact, there are probably more sucky video games, because anyone can make a video game, really. A board game takes publishing and stuff. It's like a book, but without binding. No, I'm here instead to talk about that same AI enemy ship I just brought up, and more specifically, the most climactic AI enemy in any game. The final ones. Called by most normal people as final bosses, the very last enemy you face in a game is bound to be an important one, because after all, the whole game has been leading to this moment, even if it hasn't, because every action you've done in the game to get you to that moment has led you there. Maybe not narratively, maybe you're playing a game that doesn't have a narrative, but no matter what you're doing, the end is the end. And the end is the part that everyone's going to remember, because it's the most recent part they played. With that being said, you should think that all of the most popular games have perfect final bosses. Because after all, if it doesn't leave the player with a good memory of the game, then why is it so popular? Am I right? Well, I'm here to tell you that a game doesn't need to have a good final boss. Sure, it would be nice if it did. I can think of many examples of games that have bad final bosses, but are still well-beloved games. Here are some examples. Minecraft is one of the most popular and beloved games of all time. I'm not exactly sure how it is. It's always competing with Tetris for #1 spot. I'm not sure if it currently is, but at some point in the future it will be, and at some point in the past it was. Minecraft is not a game heralded for its in-depth combat system, which mainly revolves around click, 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 click. Or, if you're playing on the computer version, click, 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 because it has a timer thing. And so you'd think that the game's final boss, the Ender Dragon, would take advantage of that simple combat mechanic to deliver a fun and simple boss. And while yes, the boss may be fun, and yes, the boss is pretty darn simple, I would say it's pretty poorly executed, technically. I mean, is it even fair to call the Ender Dragon the final boss of Minecraft? Because there's still more Minecraft after you beat the dragon. In fact, there's even more Minecraft, because after you beat the dragon, you get the ability to fly, making all that building a whole lot quicker. But when I go to fight the Ender Dragon, I'm not thinking, oh boy, time for a fantastical fantasy battle against big space dragon that goes blah blah blah. I think, oh boy, time for a jank encounter with a giant flying hitbox that launches me 70 meters in the air. Because even though Minecraft is a game all about boxes, I'm sure everyone at Mojang Studios is an expert at designing and drawing and crafting the perfectest boxes in video game history. But boy, do they sure suck at hitboxes. I mean, if you were to turn on Minecraft's handy-dandy visible hitboxes feature during the boss fight, you would see that the Ender Dragon's hitbox is not so much a box that outlines where it should be hit and where it can hit you, as it is a humongous rectangular force field that pushes everything around it away. And that's how the Ender Dragon wins. It doesn't win with its pitiful acid breath that takes seconds to materialize. By the time it's materialized, I'm already on the other side of the arena. No, the dragon wins by being humongous and touching people and getting them stuck in its humongous hitbox, doing massive damage. That's probably the reason why blocking the Ender Dragon, unlike blocking most things, takes, I'd say, like 10 times the durability as normal, because you're not getting hit by the dragon once. No, that's pretty much impossible. You're getting hit by the dragon dozens of times. And why have they never fixed this in the decade that Minecraft has been out? Well, as I said earlier, no one goes to Minecraft for exciting bosses. They have better things to work on, like, I don't know, dirt? And if you still don't believe me about that jank dragon hitbox thing, try hitting it with a melee weapon. You will not have a good time. However, the Ender Dragon is not the only boss in Minecraft. There is another boss, which I'd say is both more and less good than the Ender Dragon. It's more good in the fact that it's cooler and actually engages in fighting you, but it's less cool in the fact that the actual fight is worse than the Ender Dragon, because while the Ender Dragon is so nonchalant at fighting you that its only dangerous move is just so happening to bump into you, the Wither, which is the other boss, a three-headed skeleton flying guy with no legs or no arms, so I guess it's like a really pathetic Hydra, all it does is spam explosives at you. That's the whole boss fight. But hey wait, that's just on the Java version of Minecraft. On the Bedrock version, which is every single console except for computer, it has a whole bunch of fancy new moves, like being able to dash and explode itself and summon minions, which would all be fine and dandy if I were not playing Minecraft, where none of these attacks are actually avoidable. There's no combat systems in Minecraft. I'm just spamming the attack button and hoping I kill it before it kills me. And that's really the main problem with the Wither. Either it kills you in 10 seconds, or you kill it in 10 seconds. There's no fair middle ground. It's simply a battle of who's more overpowered. Okay, cool, I came up with one example of a very popular game that just so happens to have a terrible final boss. Here's another example, the original Super Mario Bros. For the NES. What's the final boss of that game? Well, the 7 other bosses that you've fought. Except now, this one, it's like, the arena is slightly different. But it's the same boss as always. It's just Bowser. He shoots fireballs to the left. You duck under him or jump over him. 2 very exciting options. Touch a lever at the right, and you win. That's the boss fight. Not so much a boss fight as it is a boss who just so happens to be chilling on a bridge, rather unfortunately next to a giant axe. Come to think of it, it's rather disappointing that it took Nintendo, one of the most richest gaming companies in the world, like a decade before they started making even partially competent bosses for their Mario games. You know, their most popular franchise, I assume. I'm not an aficionado on Nintendo Enterprises, but I'd have to assume that Mario is pretty high up there. Most of the bosses in Mario games are terrible. They just think that the same formula of jumping on their head 3 times will engage in something interesting. When most of the time, the bosses that people talk about most from Mario games that I've heard of are the ones that don't get jumped on their head 3 times. The ones that have, I don't know, mechanics? Wait, Mojang, write this down. Bosses have to have mechanics and don't just fly around randomly? But hey, this really can't be counted against Mojang and Nintendo, because they're not popular because they make games focused around combat. Although Nintendo does make games focused around combat, but not Mario. Mario is a pretty chill guy, just stomping turtles and whatnot, going down pipes. What would be really surprising if there was a studio known for having well-put-together combat systems that just so happened to have flunked a few of their final bosses. Now, as you've probably already known by now, if you've been watching this show for long enough, I am quite a fan of Doom. I think Doom is a great game. I think Doom is a fun game. I think Doom is a game that everyone should play at some point. But I really cannot say that the first few Doom games' final bosses are good. In fact, most of them are terrible. Alright, quick history rundown here. Doom 1, the first game in the series. Its final boss? A big spider with a machine gun. How does it work? Well, it's a big spider, so it clunkily moves around slowly towards you, and it has a machine gun, so it shoots that, and that's all it does. Well, does it have a big health pool to make up for its slow mobility and clunky attacks? No, it doesn't. In fact, for a final boss, it has a considerably smaller health pool than the previous boss. Doom 2, the final boss. A wall. Yes, Doom 2 is rather infamous for having its final boss be a wall texture that you shoot rockets at. But you can't just shoot rockets at a wall. That would be ridiculous. You have to shoot rockets at a wall at a very specific point while going up an elevator. So it's more so a puzzle than it is a boss. Because the wall doesn't actually attack you, it just spawns more monsters. I think that the final boss of Doom 2 would work better in a Mario game, because Mario is good at platforming. Doom Guy is not good at platforming. The poor guy can't even jump until 2016. Or I guess, Doom 3, he can jump, but it's also not the same guy, it's a different guy in that game. The final boss of that game, well, I honestly don't remember what it does. It's a cyber demon, one of the most iconic enemies in the franchise, and they've been saving the reveal of the cyber demon for Doom 3 until the very last boss. And while Doom 3 does have some great bosses, the cyber demon is not one of them. What does it do? Well, it does the same thing it did 20 years ago. Shoots missiles very slowly. Doom 1's final boss, Pest Extermination Simulator. Doom 2's final boss, Home Renovation Simulator. Doom 3's final boss. It's a cyber demon. Hello. But what about Doom's sister series, Quake? Not nearly as popular, but still just as fun. I mean, after all, Quake is a lot more technically advanced than Doom is. While Doom just has flat sprites to represent the monsters, Quake has fully rendered 3D characters. Wow, this is the future. Surely they'll do something interesting with the final boss. And so, obviously, the people at id Software, the people who made the game, were looking through their previous works to decide which game had the best final boss that they wanted to recreate in 3D. They looked at Doom 2 and said, I love walls. Except this time, instead of a wall, you're fighting the floor. And the floor has a tentacle protruding out of the floor. And to kill the floor, you must take a teleporter to teleport into the tentacle. And then the tentacle dies and you win the game. How does Quake's other two bosses fare? Well, the first boss is a big monster that you kill with stage gimmicks. I think it was electrocuting. You electrocute a monster made of fire because heat kills fire, apparently. But the second boss, oh, you're not going to believe this. Remember that time in Doom 1 where the very first boss was two normal enemies, except they were presented as if they were a big deal? Quake took that very inspired concept and created Quake's second boss, which is just two spider guys that shoot missiles. But hey, if all these games that I hold so dear have such terrible bosses, what even does make a good final boss? Well, according to most people, most gimmicks for final bosses involve some sort of thing that is a test of the accumulated skills you've acquired through the game, which Mario does by ignoring the platforming skills you've acquired and instead requiring you to jump on someone 3 times. However, the very vanilla, basic, boring principles of, well, I guess that's good game design, involves an accumulation of skill. So what's the most bare bones but effective way to test accumulated skill? We'll just give the final boss the ability of every other boss, but combined into one boss, which is a trend that shockingly many games follow. Is this a bad trend? No. Does it nearly always make a decent final boss? Yes. Can it be done masterfully? Anything can. Is it very creative? No, but it works. And working is all that these bosses need. At least you're not a wall. When I think of a final boss that just uses a whole bunch of abilities that you're already familiar with, I think of Rogue Legacy. A game that's not nearly as popular as I think it should be, because it was one of the first to be popular in the roguelike genre, but that's a story for another day. Its final boss just has all the abilities that your character has, but they're like blue. Can I think of any other examples off the top of my head, even though I presented this as if I knew a lot of examples off the top of my head? No. But just look at really any person's first indie game. They'll most likely follow this design philosophy, because it's simple and effective. And as someone who's made games myself, I can confirm that I've done this before. I now try not to, and I try to make the final boss be something unique. But I cannot state how effective this strategy is, despite how simple it is. Actually, no, here's one more example, from another game that I've talked rather passionately about, although I guess not specifically this installment. In fact, I think that I've actually talked down to Dark Souls 3 before, which I honestly regret doing, because I made it sound like Dark Souls 3 is a terrible game, which it's not. Dark Souls 3 is a good game. But more importantly, on topic, it's a good game that uses that final boss design philosophy, because the final boss of that game is a physical manifestation of everyone who's completed the first game, and so it has all the abilities that the player has, except it's a Dark Souls boss, so it knows how to use them a whole lot more effectively than you. Well, why does it have abilities specifically from Dark Souls 3 if it's just characters from Dark Souls 1 and other people who've linked the flame? I don't know, because it looks cool. Giant lasers are fun. We need more giant lasers. I guess it wouldn't be too far a stretch to assume that between Dark Souls 1 and 3, some other people may have linked the flame that just so happen to have giant anime lasers that they can fire at will. It's not an impossibility. Speaking of other games that are not Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 2 takes a rather different approach to its final boss, having 3 final bosses. 2, if you haven't completed the main game completely. But there are 3 final bosses, all in the same room. And rather surprisingly, the final boss, the third one, doesn't actually drop anything. It has no rewards for killing it. I guess the real Dark Souls was the friends we made along the way. This has been Billy Netjo's Rant, and I hope you enjoyed. No, I didn't forget. This is the spring interview that you've been waiting for. Okay, so what are your thoughts on spring?
Well, it's not my favorite season. I like winter more, but spring is fine.
Do you have any idea why bunnies are so closely linked to spring?
I think it has something to do with, spring is the start of life, and baby bunnies are cute. It probably also has something to do with the Easter Bunny, but I don't know why the Easter Bunny is a bunny. Also, this technically means that every single person who attended that Future Careers program has interviewed me about spring.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So, do you get interviewed a lot?
Well, of course I get asked a lot of pharmacy questions, but that's not really an interview, that's just being asked a question.
What's the difference between being interviewed and being asked a question?
I don't think there really is a difference. It's just when you're interviewing someone, you ask more than one question before asking them questions about questions.
Well, okay, to tailor a question more to you then, What medicine do you prescribe the most during a spraying season?
Billy, pharmacists don't prescribe medicine, they just give it out.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. So you're like a vending machine.
Well, that's not a very flattering way to describe the job, but, sort of. And, speaking of that job, I actually really need to get back to work. It's nice seeing you again, but I'm probably gonna get in trouble if I don't go pharmacy some things.
Yeah, of course, I understand. Have fun with the measuring and stuff. As for me, I will go back to doing my job, which is, nothing. This has been Billy Net Joe's Almost an Interview, and I hope you enjoyed.